French and American politicians are responding to the terrorist attack in a variety of different ways in regards to our willingness in the future to accept Syrian refugees in. And I want to contrast them because what the French president said today is very impressive. It shows a great deal of open-mindedness, restraint in the wake of the worst terror attack in France in perhaps 70 years. He said some have wanted to link the influx of refugees to Friday's acts of terror, but 30,000 refugees will be welcomed in the next 2 years regardless. He said France has a simultaneous duty to ensure humanity for refugees and protection of the French people. I know your worries, he said. We also have to verify people who are coming onto the European territory and into France to make sure there are zero risks for our country. So we will be executing necessary verification before accepting any refugees onto our soil. So they're making very clear that regardless of these terror attacks, perhaps wisely noting that the people who carried out the terror attacks are not Syrian refugees, they're going to continue to let in far more potentially Syrian refugees than we are as a country, despite the fact that the U.S. has about 5 times the population as France.
Yeah. I mean, and this guy is still not to be verified. He was the reality is he did come in, or they believe that he came in to the island of Leros on October the 3rd, and he used this fake Syrian passport.
But he was born, if you're referring to the purported mastermind, he was born in the EU. He wasn't someone who was born and raised in Syria and now is being sent over to wreak havoc.
Correct. But he used, ostensibly, or the theory currently is that he used that as a mechanism to gain entry.
Yeah.
Right? He came under the cover of that.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's admirable and it's the right thing to do. The temptation to overreact to when something like this happens is just all too palpable, I think. And I think that restraint, listen, France has gone in and they've launched these attacks, as we said at the beginning, on Raqqa. The efficacy of those attacks, I honestly don't know. I can't tell you. I can't tell you. I mean, the reports are that some of the ISIS leadership are fleeing, but really you're razing to the ground territory that's already been bombed to smithereens, I would imagine, anyway. It feels good to do it. But to come back, so I don't know how effective that really and truly is, but it's a show of force and it's a show of coalition, if you will, between France and the United States. But to come back to this point, I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. I think it's admirable. The United Kingdom, for what it's worth, but the United Kingdom are sticking to their guns as well, and they're sticking with their policy of accepting refugees in. Germany continues as well. And Germany, let's remind ourselves, Germany's estimated is going to take in 800,000 refugees this year alone.
That's a lot of refugees.
7 million people, John, have been displaced by this conflict.
Yeah.
7 million people.
A very significant portion of the entire population of Syria, let alone some of the surrounding countries.
So, 800,000, I mean, it is a gargantuan amount.
But you're saying as a percentage,
it's a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's just mind-blowing.
It's a splash in the bucket. It's several drops, I suppose.
I'm glad.
But yeah, and then we're
you
debating
pulled me out of my
10,000.
depression. I was kind of like sinking into despair there because I'm like, what the?
Yeah.
I mean, when you really look at the numbers, it is so mesmerizingly depressing how messed up the situation is, and you just grasp at anything to try and find some way through it and some
way to control it, some way to feel that you have control.
And now what they're doing is they're going to, and I wouldn't necessarily bet my mortgage on it, but what they're doing is they're going to get Assad is going to, is seen as a stabilizing force, and it's going to come full fucking circle.
Yeah.
And we're going to be back where we were 3 or 4 years ago, and hundreds of thousands of people are dead, and millions are displaced.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. Now, while France, obviously being, I would assume there was some chance that they would have gone in the opposite direction, that they might have felt that their population would have felt safer without bringing in the refugees. Thankfully, either the politicians and the population a little bit more understanding of that issue than a number of people here in the United States. And I would like to spotlight one of those people. This is State Senator Glenn Casada, chairman of the House Republican Caucus in Tennessee, who said that the state should activate the National Guard to stop Syrian refugees from coming into Tennessee by whatever means we can. He said specifically, I'm not worried about what a bureaucrat in D.C. or an unelected judge thinks, perhaps referencing the fact that states cannot actually bar refugees from being settled there. He says we need to gather Syrian refugees up and politely take them back to the ICE center and say, they're not coming to Tennessee, they're yours. By the way, you should bear in mind that only 16 refugees from Syria have been settled in Tennessee between 1996 and July 2014, which means less than 1 refugee per year. So those 16 people, I guess you could put them on one bus. That makes his plan a little bit more reasonable, perhaps.
Or cost-effective.
And more cost-effective. What I love about this is he's very much like Trump. They seem to think you can do any barbaric policy you want as long as you put the word politely in. And one or two quick points I want to make about that. Jeb Bush is saying now that we need to send in ground troops, something like 50,000 ground troops. Okay, if bombings and ground troops in the Middle East stopped these terrorist attacks, they would have been stopped in the past 15 years. I think we gave it a nice try in that regard to those particular strategies. Maybe we should try something else. Maybe.
He's got the same
Maybe.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we thought this was the good Bush. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe. I'm not a politician. I'm not a foreign policy expert. Maybe there's a reason that Peru and Canada aren't being bombed by ISIS. Maybe there's a reason that certain countries are being bombed. Maybe if we get together and think about that, we can figure out why it is that certain countries are and are not being struck by these terrorist attacks. And maybe we can save a ton of lives and a ton of money by getting the fuck out of there. Maybe we should try that for a couple of years and see what happens. And I understand that there's a chance, I understand that maybe we've moved past the point of not having any involvement there whatsoever, considering that we've contributed in a very real way, in a number of different ways, to the situation in Syria and Afghanistan that we currently have today. But simply continuing the policy we had under George W. Bush and Obama with a new Bush doesn't seem to me to be a recipe for success.